Welcome back, everyone. So, one thing that we keep seeing online, well, specifically on social media, over and over again is tips for self-care, or mantras about how you should be practicing self-care, how you should love yourself. And that's nice, but what does that actually mean? Because it's pretty vague to take care of yourself, to love yourself. So Kibbe and I are going to talk about what self-care means from a clinical perspective, rather than just this social media perspective. So Kibbe, define self-care for us.
I was actually really interested in this topic and trying to discover more about what self-care actually meant, because now that we're in the mental health podcast world and we're following and being followed by all these different mental health gurus and podcasts and things like that, I just see constantly posts that says, you know, are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling blue from COVID? Just practice self-care. Be gentle on yourself. Love yourself. And I always rolled my eyes a little bit because I'm like, what do you mean by that? Like, I don't even know. Like, I'm a therapist. I don't even know what that means. And the other day I was watching Euphoria on HBO, if you haven't watched it. It's a pretty intense show. It's really good. But there was a scene where one of the characters, she struggles with body image issues, and she was, you know, going through a depression. And there's this really cool scene where she's going online and just snacking, eating food, looking really depressed. And she's picturing all of these different social media influencers, like these beautiful ladies, just saying, "Hey, Kat, you just need to love yourself." And she's like, "What do you mean? I hate myself." And it's just like all these different people, like, you just need to practice self-love and be a strong woman that you know you are. And it's just so funny because it's so eye roll. It's so eye rolly. So I'm sorry if we're trashing all the people that we're connected to. But the definition of self-care I looked up is anything that promotes your health, like any activities or things that you do that promote your health. And in this case, we're talking about mental health. So that's what I read it actually means.
So that's incredibly vague. Yeah. I mean, that could be that could be anything. Because you can argue at any given moment that any activity promotes your health.
Right.
Maybe not heroin use, but most other things. So I think one issue is, like, when we say self-care, do we mean relaxation? I put a prompt out on Instagram and things really diverged. I would say half the people gave answers along the lines of relaxation, getting manicures, getting the hot tub. Other people mentioned things like preparing healthy food, cooking, gardening, organizing because it can declutter the minds, creative journaling. So do we mean relaxation when we mean self-care, or do we mean something else? One place we can look is a treatment for depression called behavioral activation. This is something that I'm currently treating right now. I mean, it's an intervention that I'm using. And its object is basically, if you are depressed, we don't need to sit around and talk about it. Because if you're depressed, you're probably thinking about your own depression all the time anyway. And you get yourself in these negative mental loops, and it just gets you nowhere. What you really need to be doing if you're depressed is getting up and doing things that bring value to your life. So if we told a depressed person, hey, just love yourself, just relax, just practice some self-care, that doesn't really provide them with anything. It doesn't really tell them what to do. And oftentimes, the things that people with depression are doing look a lot like relaxation anyway. And so it's usually the opposite of relaxation that we mean by self-care in those instances.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too, because I think even if I were to say self-care, it would just be way more obvious before the pandemic. But now, because I think before the pandemic, and I'm mostly speaking for myself and the patients I've seen, before the pandemic, there was just so much stuff that we're all caught up in, so much rat race. We're going out all the time, getting really busy, getting burnt out at work, and that we're still burnt out, and we're still we're still feeling frazzled. But I think it looks a lot different. It's like we have all spent a lot of time doing the things that used to be relaxing, and now it just feels like, for me, running around to different clinics and different classes and grad school, like, self-care for me looked like just recharging at home, just sitting and watching TV and spending time by myself. Now if I'm do that, I go nuts, right? I'm starting to feel more this pent up and more depressed, to be honest. So it really does beg the question. I mean, there's a lot of those social media posts that say, you know what self-care is? It's like, putting on a face mask and relaxing at home. But I think that promotes this idea that there's really only very specific activities that look like self-care or are considered self-care and one that are not. And I don't think this one size fits all actually works anymore.
Right. I think the times when I see those sorts of self-care activities being really justified, I mean, they're always justified. Like, everybody can put on a face mask. There's nothing wrong with that. But for highly anxious, perfectionistic people who pour all their energy into other people and never give anything back for themselves, I think that those people would benefit from putting on a face mask.
Yeah.
Because that's something different that they're not used to doing. So it can reintroduce them to themselves. It can help them understand that they are a person worthy of their own attention and meeting their own needs instead of constantly being out there for other people.
But that's not always the case, right? So we want to not just define self-care as just doing things that are relaxing and in one particular direction for yourself. There's all these other ways to actually care for your mental health. So behavioral activation is a really good model for that because it makes it really simple. It's like, what do you do if you're depressed? Like, what can I do and change in my day-to-day routine that could make me go from feeling depressed or down or anhedonic, which is another word for that kind of blah, I'm not interested in anything feeling, that numbness, to feeling like energized and motivated again. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the way BA will typically start is you'll spend some sessions talking about values. I've done a values episode on here before with some prompts for how to figure out what your values are. I mean, one is, imagine it's your 90th birthday party. Who's there? What do they say in their toasts? What does the party look like? To really just like reconnect you with what's important. And you try to get all of these different domains. Okay, in the family domain, what's important? What does being a good daughter, wife, father, cousin look like to you? And you really get to pick that out. Like, does it mean calling more often? Does it mean visiting more often? Does it mean having deeper conversations with those people when you're there? Does it mean being of service to them, helping your grandparents keep their house clean or get them groceries? Like, what? These things aren't necessarily enjoyable. Like, cleaning another person's house isn't going to be fun for most people, but it can provide that sense of, oh, I actually like who I am again because I'm spending my time in service of something that I care about. And then you can apply the same kinds of questions to, what change do you want to make in the world? What do you want your impact to be? What does adventure mean to you? Like, you kind of just figure out, like, what are these broad values, and then what kinds of things could you do to achieve them? And typically in the beginning, people are feeling just really incapable of doing anything. And so you make these steps really, really, really small. If somebody really values reading and literature and edifying the mind, but all they can do is sit around and drink and watch TV, then you're not going to tell them to go read the rise and fall of the Roman Empire that Saturday. You're going to say, how about you go to a bookstore and pick out a book and then get back to me next week?
Yeah, it's really shifting the way, I think what's underlying some of those messages on social media that I hate so much is that a good life, like a healthy life, it's one that is happy and relaxing and comfortable. Mm-hmm. And yeah, of course, we're into those things, right? But I think there's so much focus of that, just like being comfortable and avoiding pain or discomfort and suffering and challenge. You and I are kind of aligned on this, but we really value doing things that are hard just for the sake of growth. And the way behavioral activation and a lot of therapies that we've been training in lately are about, how do you build a life worth living? How do you build a meaningful life? As you're mentioning, a meaningful life is not always easy. It's not always comfortable. Like, if meaningful life means being a great parent, all the people out there who have kids are very familiar with that's not always comfortable and relaxing and easy, right? It's full of challenges, full of pain, it's full of loss and fear and bringing yourself out of the comfort zone, whether you like it or not. But that's what we consider a healthy life, something that is worth living to you, something that's meaningful.
Yeah, I think so. I remember before I got into grad school, I would feel so guilty when I watched TV. Like, I'm wasting time. I could be writing the great American novel right now. What am I doing? And then as soon as I got into Duke, I was really much more okay with that behavior. And I still watch more than I should, but I think the difference was that I was proud of myself when I got into Duke, started grad school. I had a really defined goal. I felt like the work I was doing was within my values. And so that just allowed me to give myself a break and say, hey, like, the majority of my time is spent in service of something important to me. So yeah, so now I can relax. And I think maybe that feeling of guilt is worth listening to. The flip side is that some people feel guilty every time they do something nice or relaxing for themselves at all. And so do we know how to parse that out?
Yeah, I think that you have to look at the long term. I think that there's no right or wrong kind of self-care, but I think that the definition that we're kind of, finding ourselves developing is self-care would be engaging in activities that help you live in line with your values, like help you live a meaningful life. Before, if we're, I totally relate to that. Like, watching hours and hours of TV, it didn't get me anywhere. It didn't, help me become the person I want to be, the kind of girlfriend, daughter, professional. But now it does. Now, because so much of my day is really like mentally exhausting and draining in many ways, taking a few moments to watch TV to just recharge helps me come back to my next session or to my next piece of work and not feel resentful and not feel like I had no time for myself, and it helps me be more present there. So I think you're looking at the long term. If you're doing all these activities and it's actually helping you move towards your goals, great. If it's taking you away from it or making you avoid discomfort, right? If I'm taking a bath or putting on a face mask to avoid and procrastinate, then it's not, right? Then the same thing that I could see on the Instagram post would function the opposite, making me less healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a question I would ask the guilt is, am I feeling guilty because I'm not in a place in my life that I'm proud of? Or am I feeling guilty because I was taught that I should never do anything for myself? So you can explore that guilt. So another thing we do in BA1, so basically it starts out, you map out all your weeks. So you say hour by hour what you did during any given day in that week. You get as many days as possible down on paper. And so you can see, like, where is this time just going to die? Like, when is just nothing important happening? It's not for recharging. It's just, you're either doing everything for other people. Like, if I have a patient who has kids and a full-time job and is just working all the time, I am going to say, when can you lock yourself in your bathroom so your kids can't get you, and take an extra long shower? Because you need to recharge in order to be there for your kids and be there for your values more. But if I have a different kind of patient, it's, why are you watching TV for 5 hours? What is the thing? What is this avoidance behavior after? And then you try to figure out, like, what are some small activities that get you back in line with your values? And then you rate them from enjoyment and importance. Because oftentimes people stop at enjoyment. And they say, TV is really enjoyable. It's a 10 out of 10, but it's a 1 out of 10 importance. And you really want to get kind of a mix of things. I mean, if you're only doing things that are important and not enjoyable, you're probably not going to be happy either. Yeah. But it's really, those 10 out of 10 important activities that are going to move you towards real self-care. I mean, I'm super burnt out right now. It's a bad semester. I hate it. This is why we're doing this episode. It's part because Kibby's, like super stressed and got so much work on her plate too. But I think the one thing, I look back at this weekend and it's like I painted, and that was something I really needed to get done. And it also got me back in touch with my creative side, I guess. That made me feel good. I saw my grandmother, had brunch with her. That, reconnected me with my family. Did I do anything else important this weekend? Probably not,
Dress
but that's
shopping.
pretty good. We went wedding dress shopping.
That old thing.
That was necessary. Yeah, but sometimes I find those types of weekends more relaxing than the weekends when I just lay in bed all day and eat pizza.
Yeah, you're bringing an important point about different kinds of self-care activities in behavioral activation. There's the pleasurable activities, the ones you enjoy, and then there's the category of mastery. So activities that build mastery, and those activities are something that involve facing challenges, building new skills, working towards a goal, right? So there's that in the pleasure, it's like the relaxation, the pampering, the things that just make you feel good, right? That just feel comforting or feel fun or rewarding in that way. But then there's another type of reward that we often forget, which is like doing something hard because it's important to you. And I really think that's missing in a lot of the social media discussion about self-care, because it as we keep saying, it's so focused on these relaxation activities, but there's other ones that boost your mood, help your mental health because they build skills. And I'm just like a really big fan of mastery. You know this. Like I love my comfort. I like doing things for my body. I love getting massages and yoga. Like that's my pleasure activity. But I also really feel good when I'm working. Like I just picked up doing crocheting again, and just the feeling of doing something really hard and learning how to overcome those challenges and getting better at something. Actually, I feel myself feel more confident, more motivated, more energized. And yeah, these are things that require work. Like the things I'm doing at work now, starting this clinical trial, it's work. But in a way, sometimes for me, it is self-care, because at the end of the day, I'm moving towards my goals and living a meaningful life, like doing psychology, and B, I'm feeling more charged up. I'm feeling more that I want to wake up today and I want to do something. I'm kind of excited for the things I have coming up in my day, and not that feeling of dread. So I don't know. That's why I think there's two different kinds of self-care.
Yeah, I think that mastery piece is really critical. Even so, there's a psychologist named Erik Erikson who basically came up with these stages of development that all involved crises. So basically, at any given stage in development, if you solve this crisis, then you move on to the next and you solve that one. So one that's late in life that he names is called generativity versus stagnation. And so this is the idea that when you look back on your life, you realize that you've lived a life of making commitments to other people, and mastering something that you've given to the world. Maybe that's your work, maybe it's art, mentoring people, basically like contributing to the next generation. So you've left your mark and you've done something. Versus stagnation, not improving yourself, putting yourself before others, just not really getting involved. I mean, so he's identified this as a true way to decide whether your life was worth living, in a way. I mean, that this is a crisis that happens late in life when you look back and take stock. And so I think, this clearly involves mastery, and it makes sense, do I respect myself? That usually comes with some sort of mastery component. Did I master being the person that I wanted to be? Did I give to the world something I'm proud of? And just having that self-confidence. I mean, God, I never feel self-confident at work. So I don't work is a place that, well, with clients I do, I guess. But I would feel a lot worse if it was just work and then relaxation. I feel way better when it's work, and then I cook something delicious, and then I tend to my garden and watch things grow, and I read literature and get, that kind of thing going back again. And then I've got all of these different areas that are making me feel confident and revived, so that my identity isn't just dependent on this one area of my life.
Ooh, look at you bringing out the Erikson, the little history of psychology. Right? I'm impressed. I guess this is reminding me a lot of one of our first, I think it's literally our first episode. We talked about Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and yeah, the whole emphasis that, you know, you and I really love of building a life that's meaningful, and that the feeling of being revived, the feeling that you're like living, that you're feeling vital, right? Like that's, for me, I didn't realize like how much that meant to me. It could be a lot of pressure because it's like, oh my God, I gotta do all these amazing things and have a sense of purpose. Like, no, I've realized what is important because I dated someone who was just really loved self-care, like really latched on to the concept of self-care. And every time he did something he didn't want to do or anticipated doing something he didn't want to do, he's like, no, I got to practice self-care. And what that looked like was like smoking weed all day and playing music for hours on end, and he wouldn't move towards his goals. And he kept saying like, self-care is not selfish. Now, I totally agree with that. But if you're doing it to the detriment of, if you're doing it to detract from living a life that's like purposeful and meaningful, and really avoiding that, I'm like, dude, it can get selfish, you know?
Yeah.
It really can. So what I'm saying is like, what you brought up was totally clicked with something with me. That's really something I value, and that's really how I see like a healthy life is a generative one, something that gives to the world. It doesn't matter if it's like giving your kid the best life that you possibly can, or making little crochet dolls that I'm doing right now, or treating patients, or, you know, writing a book, whatever it is that you know, making someone happy in one day, just whatever it is. But I think like contributing in the way that you find meaningful is healthy, and activities that help you do that and support you doing that would be self-care.
Yeah. I think we can basically sum up. I mean, that feeling you get when you solve a challenge or you embrace a challenge, that I think is true self-care. I mean, that is such an amazing feeling. And if you're doing that all day long, then yeah, you need a break. So take a bath.
Yeah, a balance of the mastery and the pleasurable activities. Yeah.
Yeah. But really just be able to take stock of your life and say, am I proud of myself? Am I proud of the way my life is going? And if not, then, you know, do something, I guess. We should write new social media posts.
We should.
Do something.
And keeping in mind, too, that I love what you said about when people are too other-oriented, really focusing on yourself and what's good for you can be self-care. But a lot of self-care doesn't have to necessarily be solitary, right? You don't have to make it just like sipping wine in a bath or something like that, or doing something on your own. It could actually mean really connecting to a good friend that you love, right? Or giving to someone, like, you know, giving a really nice gift to someone, something that makes you feel revived and motivated, and that vital feeling. So it doesn't have to be just something that's self-oriented. It could be other-oriented, as long as you're getting that boost of pleasure or mastery feeling, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have friends who are anhedonic or depressed, or just they're slipping into this selfish self-care kind of thing, I would just say, like, try to figure out anything that would be a challenge that feels like one they will master. And then you can, like, raise the bar. I think I'm gonna start a ceramics class. That was actually one thing that helped with my depression a lot back in the day. But you know, if I were really depressed right now and I'd mentioned that to you in the past, like, maybe you could get me set up with a ceramics class, or say like, hey, let's go to this class together, or get a lump of clay or something, like anything that can kind of reconnect somebody to these feelings of mastery and challenge. And getting them to do new things. And if it's the opposite, if someone really needs rest and relaxation, babysit their kids for a day, or book them a massage or something. This feels like one of the places where friends can really help.
Yeah, and as a loved one, I wouldn't say impose your values and the way you think a good life or meaningful life should be. But as we've mentioned this in previous episodes, but you might know your friend or family member or other loved one really well, and know when they're functioning at their best, like when they're feeling like the most themselves. You can help that person remember what that's like and what they were doing. Like, how were they spending their day? Were they socializing a lot? Were they exercising a lot? Were they, like just kind of recalling the activities that person did and help them break it down to bite-sized pieces, something that they can do. Like just getting a lump of clay, even that's like a very small step. If jumping back into being a expert ceramicist is a little bit too much in the moment. I do want to say though, I feel like we contradict ourselves with this whole episode, but as much as I say specific activities is not self-care for everyone, there is some research to show that a couple things really do help your mental health. One is movement. And I don't mean exercise in a particular way, particular frequency. Every body needs something different, but it does need movement. And so even if it's like a 10-minute walk, 10 minutes of stretching, or full-on exercise that you love to do, playing sports, there's just so much research to show that physical activity helps mental health as well as physical health. So I would say that is definitely a self-care activity. It's just you have to listen to your body and what makes sense. And the other cool study that I read recently is that novelty and and diversity of experiences actually helps mental health and mental well-being, they called it. It was a study where it's a mobile phone study where they track people and where they went and what they did. And that these people reported their, overall well-being, how they felt about themselves. And the people who did novel activities, like changed up their routine every once in a while or did something new, went somewhere new, they reported higher well-being. So basically shake it up every once in a while, like try a new food, see a friend that you haven't seen in a really long time. If you're used to taking a walk or going to work in a particular way, change it up and just get a whole new, change of environment. So,
yeah, well, we know that increases attraction, so it makes sense that it would increase attraction to life. Awesome, Kibby. Well, you want to close out with some resources?
Yeah, I actually think that the most helpful resource for our listeners is there's a cool behavioral activation for depression handout that I found online. Is just like a PDF that explains what behavioral activation is. But there's a section that talks about the different kind of activities that we were talking about, the mastery and pleasure activities, and also talks about values too. So it was a free resource that I found. I'm going to link it to our site. So check out our site or the show notes for that resource.
Perfect. And if one of your self-care activities is being nice to others, then please remember to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.